Good morning. This is Jeff Wardson with Auto Trends with JeffCars.com, and this is our premiere edition. We have with us Renee Stevens. Renee Stevens is the Vice President of U.S. Auto Quality with J.D. Power, which I consider to be the auto industry guru for quality survey studies of all new and pre-owned vehicles. Good morning, Renee. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jeff, and good morning to you, too. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. I'm glad that you got up bright and early for us to move forward with our first radio show to air. So, first question for you. Were you about to say something? Feel free to interject.
No, I said, just awesome.
So, first question for you. So, you're the U.S. Vice President of Quality. Tell us a little bit about the U.S. Vice President of Quality's position with J.D. Power. Tell us a little bit about the history of the automotive surveying process. What I want our listeners to find out or to learn more about is before they go out and purchase a vehicle, be it new or pre-owned, that they have another source in which they're probably not even familiar with to determine if they're buying a vehicle that's dependable, reliable, things of that sort. So give us a little bit about the history of the automotive surveying process with J.D. Power.
I'll be glad to. So let me give you a little bit of indication about the quality process in general. And quality is very, very important to J.D. Power, and it was really the hallmark of the company as it started really back in the 1960s when Dave Power started the company. And really what the whole company is about is really bringing voice of customer from the consumers back into the manufacturers and the suppliers to make sure that we're improving the process, we're improving the product, and we're really listening to what the consumer has to say. And we do it in a number of different ways. We have what we call the initial quality study, and that is conducted kind of early on, a really initial feel. It's 90 days of ownership. So after consumers have their vehicle for about 3 months, we'll go out and we ask them many questions about what their experience has been with their vehicle. And we ask not only about what they think about the design, but also have they had any issues, any concerns, and from their standpoint that they'd like to input back to us as well. And then we provide those to the manufacturers. Then we also ask at a longer-term standpoint, we look at after 3 years of ownership, and that's our vehicle dependability study, where we look at, again, asking the consumers, okay, now you've had your vehicle for 3 years, and it's consumers that have had that same vehicle for those 3 years. So they're not buying a vehicle after 3 years or getting a used vehicle. It's they've owned the vehicle for 3 years. And then we ask them, so how do you feel about your vehicle now? What have you experienced? What problems have you noticed? Or what concerns do you have about your vehicles at this point in time? Both surveys have been conducted for many years now. We're in our 29th year of doing the initial quality study. So we've got really a wealth of history and knowledge about the industry on initial. And then the 26th year for the dependability study. So again, a wealth of information about what the trends have been over time.
Okay, so this gives us a good overview of how the consumers are actually involved in the process. So if I'm a consumer, Renee, and I just purchased a brand new 2015 Nissan Maxima, will I get a survey from J.D. Powers on the quality of my vehicle? I know that typically I'll get one from the dealership, or I'll get one from the manufacturer itself to see how the sales process was, the customer service process was. But at what point will I get a survey from you, or will I get a survey?
Yeah, we do a sampling process. So typically from your dealership, they survey 100% of the consumers that buy from their dealer. And same way in some cases with some manufacturers, they'll survey 100% of their buyers. From our standpoint, we go out and we survey a percentage of a sampling of the U.S. population. In this case, we also do similar studies overseas. So you, in particular, may or may not get a survey from us, but a random sample that we take from, we use our all poke names. So we use vehicle registrations to go out and select a representative sample from the U.S. population.
Okay. Is there an actual number? I know I've read in the past maybe 66,000 or something of that sort. Is that kind of the volume of consumers in which you actually sample, or is it more or less than that?
Yeah, it's more and less depending on the study. So when we look at initial quality study, it's actually more around 84, 85,000. It could be up to 86,000. It depends on the year. So this year it was close to 86,000 consumers that actually provided us back information, and we had on basically all of the brands that sell vehicles in the U.S. market, and about 215 rankable models. So we had more than that. We had about 233 models where we had information on those vehicles, but then we go back and we make sure we have enough to actually look at comparable results and rankable results. So it's a very comprehensive study. Now, when you move to the vehicle dependability study, we have a very comprehensive measure of that as well. It's more in the lines of about 34 to 35,000 consumers, because those consumers had to have held their vehicles for 3 years. But it crosses all brands. It crosses as many models as we can get. And on the flip side, from our consumers, there's a wealth of information for them to go to look at our website at jdpower.com, and they can go through and look at and select a vehicle, any model year vehicle, and a make and a brand.
Okay, Renee, so as we move forward to that, let me interject for a second. So as we move forward into that, let's look at the current U.S. initial quality study within the first 90 days. Share with me just the top 3 models, top 3 brands, and then after you mention the top 3 brands, we're going to move forward for there. I got another question to ask you. So for the current 2015 IQS study, initial quality study, consumers who own their vehicles within the first 90 days, what were the top 3 brands?
Yeah, the top 3 brands, Porsche ranked number 1. They have been the highest brand for the 3rd consecutive year. And actually, in 7 of the last 10 years, they have been the top brand. So they have been doing really, really excellent. The big story this year was Kia moved up to be ranked number 2 in the industry, which is huge for them. And they were the number 1 non-premium brand. Many times we look at the difference between premium and non-premium. They had a 20 probably per 100 improvement, and really moved up well. Had very strong performance. Jaguar also continued to do very well. Jaguar has been doing very well, both in initial quality and dependability. They ranked 3rd. And then Hyundai actually ranked 4th, which was unchanged from last year. But I don't know if you recall from last year, actually Hyundai was the best non-premium brand. So Kia and Hyundai have been doing really, really well as a brand in initial quality, as we've seen going forward.
And I guess we should make the connection also, because most consumers probably are not going to realize that Kia and Hyundai are part of the same family also. So we look.
Yes, they are. They are part of the same company, the overall company. However, they do operate as 2 distinct brands in the market here.
Exactly. Okay, so as we talk about this, there's been this perception in the past that domestic vehicles, the quality of domestic vehicles aren't the same as foreign cars. So as I'm looking through the list here, just kind of running through it quickly, here are some of the top brands, including the top 3 that you mentioned, the top 4 that you mentioned. So there's Porsche, Kia, Jaguar, Hyundai. Then Infiniti follows BMW. Chevrolet is right under BMW as far as top quality for the first 90 days. Lincoln. Then there's Lexus, Toyota, Buick, Ford, Ram, which is the truck division, Honda, and then Mercedes-Benz. All of those rank above average in the industry. So in the past, let me ask you, how would you answer this? A lot of us still have the perception of, a lot of consumers still have the perception of, that foreign cars are better than domestics. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I would say there's been, I would even narrow it further. I would say there's been a perception that the Japanese brands are much better than the American brands. in particular, I would say. And they still have top quality. If you look at, Toyota and Lexus still do perform very well. However, everyone else has been catching up. So as we looked at the performance on the domestic, so the GMs, Ford, even Chrysler, as we looked at the European brands, have the improvement on those brands, it has actually been outpacing the improvement that we've seen on Japanese brands. And in particular, the Korean brands have really improved significantly. This year, the Korean brands on average improved 11% year over year. Domestics and Europeans improved 3%, which was right at the industry average. Japanese improved, but only 1%. So the competition is getting very, very tough. And for the first time in 29 years, the Japanese average went below the industry average.
Well, let me ask you this. What caused that? Because, again, when I think of Japanese brands, in the past, I've always thought about those as being the top tier in the automotive industry. And again, we're looking at a whole flip in this, and we're looking at the Korean brand, particularly Kia and Hyundai. In the past, remember where there was this old saying that the vehicles may last as long as the payments would. Back during maybe 20 years ago, when I remember Hyundai had the product that was $49.95. And then we're looking at today that these are the top vehicles, and when we look at it based upon measuring quality, looking at as far as engine, transmission components, squeaks, rattles, things of that sort. What's been the big shift? How did Kia and Hyundai actually improve so much?
As we look at it, it's never any one factor, but it's really a combination of factors. And I mean, overriding, it's really paying attention to the voice of customer. And as I've traveled around a lot of these companies, really what I've seen is that it's kind of a three-pronged approach. I mean, one, these companies that are doing the best, the ones that are ranking at the top from a make standpoint, have really certainly paid attention to making sure the defect and malfunction. So the things you said, like the squeaks and rattles and, the true, side of the road failures, those have really declined, and companies have really paid attention to those and really tried to minimize and make sure that they've really, brought down the actual failures. On the flip side, they're also paying attention to the next generation of vehicles and launch, and really looking at, so how are consumers defining quality today? And it's not just on design and defects and a failure. It's also the definition of quality is really shifting more towards, so how usable are the features in my vehicle? How difficult is it to understand how to set the radio favorite buttons and figure out the navigation system
that
use
gets into,
my
Renee, that gets into a very interesting section there. And sorry for interrupting, but that gets into the interesting section there when we start talking about the infotainment systems. And when we look at some of the infotainment systems in the vehicles today that are similar to our smartphones that may or may not work. And I think we can kind of veer into one of the automakers who's gotten in trouble with that in the past because they launched the technology before everyone else did, and that was Ford. And consumers, as you know from looking at the survey and being an individual who review cars on a weekly basis, new cars on a weekly basis, it was a kind of a complicated process for most consumers to try to navigate a touchscreen process where the air condition, the heater, the climate control, all of those were tied into one system. And we noticed that Ford kind of listened to the voice of the consumer, and they decided to go back, keep many of those features, but also add the knobs that we're used to utilizing so that we could easily access functions and not have to go through 5 or 6 steps that seem to be a lot easier from a perception standpoint, but end up being more complicated from that standpoint. Another thing also that you mentioned is something that we look at within this quality survey is that, have you noticed that, let's say for instance, if a new vehicle, a brand new body style is coming out, and it's a new model, new body style that was just launched in 2015. Have you noticed that if it's that first year of production, do you notice a difference in quality in the first year of production as opposed to, let's say, if we're looking at the Kia brand or if we're looking at overall brand if all their vehicles are near the end of their lifespan before it's time for them to reintroduce a new body style. Have we noticed that may be the case then shifting some of the brands toward having a higher quality and other brands toward having a lower quality?
Well, launch is an interesting phenomenon because in the past, companies have not launched well. Even companies like Toyota, Honda, they've had cases which typically perform fairly flawlessly, have had cases where the launch did not go very well. So companies still struggle with launch, and many times the first year, from a problem standpoint, there's more issues that consumers will note in the year of launch. And then afterwards, you'll see quickly that the companies figure out what the concerns are and address them quickly. But, just talking about Kia, and again, another reason why they're doing fairly well is they're also starting to launch well. So they launched the new Kia Sedona this year, and it did very well. It performed it was the top, one of the top ranked vehicles in its segment.
And the Sedona,
as you get it in launch, and there's some vehicles. Porsche is the same way. The Porsche Macan, BMW, same way. The BMW 4 Series launched top in its segment, and so the companies that are figuring out the launch, how to launch well and really launch flawlessly are the ones that are you're seeing in the top, above industry average in the top ranks of our survey.
Okay, and when we mentioned the Kia Sedona, also Sedona, for those who don't know, is actually the minivan that was launched recently. So let's flip the script just a little bit, and let's look at those vehicles those brands that didn't score as well, and in the IQS study, the first 90 days of ownership. And interesting enough, these are some of the top-selling brands that showed a significant increase because they've restyled their vehicles. So let's look at maybe the bottom four that's coming in the ranking right now. So we're looking at Subaru, Chrysler, Smart Car, and we're looking at Fiat. So from a consumer's perspective, when they look at this survey and they do a deep dive into it, and we're looking at Chrysler sales are up because of the Chrysler 200. We're looking at Subaru is doing just blockbusters in sales, and we're looking at Smart Car is kind of struggling. Fiat it has a number of vehicles, but they're still trying to find their place within the industry right now. What should consumers take from this as they're looking at this survey?
Yeah, when you look at combining sales with quality, sometimes you got to keep in mind that there's also incentives involved. And in many of these cases, for example, with Fiat Chrysler, they do employ quite a few incentives on their vehicles, and they're really doing phenomenal. They have a really high conquest rate right now, above the industry average on their vehicles, and above segment averages as well. And so they're bringing consumers in, which is great. I mean, they're really getting people in. But the trick is not just getting people in; it's keeping them. And what we find with the quality level of the study, and we've looked at this over time on what do consumers actually do when they check. I just call them check boxes. So if you had no problems at all on this study, you're still about maybe 56%, likely to stay with that same brand of vehicle, because you have other reasons why you might go elsewhere. If you have three or more problems that you find, and we've studied this over a number of years, what consumers have actually done when they've gone back to the dealer the next time, and that drops to around 46% of consumers in this initial quality study then stay with that brand. And while that doesn't sound like a whole lot, if you know anything think about market share, just like a 1-point drop in a market share can mean millions and millions of dollars in revenue, lost revenue for companies.
Okay.
When actually defect a brand. So it's not so much it's getting them in is so important. But what this means and what quality means, not only in this initial quality study, but also particularly in dependability, because now you're at your 3-year point, you're getting ready for your next vehicle. that drops off even more in dependability if consumers still have problems at that point. So it's keeping the customer that's really important.
Okay. So also we talked about conquest in here.
Mm-hmm.
So what does conquest mean to a consumer?
What Conquest means is a manufacturer or a brand would then the buyer that comes into their brand or buys their current vehicle, say their 2015 vehicle, came from another brand. So somebody that just bought a Chrysler 200, maybe they just left a Chevy Malibu.
Okay.
So that would be a Conquest sale.
Okay.
And now loyalty would be, okay, they bought another Chrysler. Maybe next time they went up and moved up to a Chrysler 300. So again, just to give you an example.
Okay.
And that's really what you want them to do when you're Chrysler. You really want them, or to really stay within the company and stay within the brand.
Exactly. So when I'm out trying to determine the quality of vehicles, determine if I'm buying a dependable vehicle or not, typically I'm aware of Consumer Reports, which I could buy on the magazine stands. Now, what's the difference between Consumer Reports and accessing yours through jdpower.com? What's the difference between the two reports?
Yeah, it's a little bit different measurement and a different focus. So for Consumer Reports, they'll look at it's a survey of the readership. So it's not like a random sample. It's basically just the readers. And they take a look and they ask them just to report very high level off of maybe 8 or 10 major categories. There might be up to 12 major categories. And so what problems have you experienced? What actual, more on the failure standpoint, have you experienced in the last 12 months? And it's reader reported. And then they take that information and combine it up, and basically that's then available to consumers to go look at. They also combine that with, they do more of expert testing. So they will go purchase a new model when it comes available. They will go conduct their own testing with their own performance ratings. And then that then comes together, the performance rating, and then the last three years of survey results to be either recommended or not a recommendation going forward. Now, our dependability survey is probably as close to that, though not quite. What we actually do is we look at more of the customer experience, and we go out and try to get a representative sample so that manufacturers can actually understand, okay, so what's going on really out there in the field, and understand it from a holistic standpoint, and then do appropriate benchmarking to say, okay, am I better, am I worse? What do I need to do different? Who's doing it best? And what are they doing that maybe I should be looking at if it's working well in another area? So it's a little different focus, and ours is actually involved not only defects, but again, consumers' definition of quality really has changed over time, and it really involves a lot more of usability and this idea of how do I use this? What value do I obtain from my interaction with things like the nav system, steering wheel controls, blind alerts, and that type of features. And so we actually measure all those various areas in that interaction and look at, so what do consumers want? What are they really experiencing with that vehicle?
Oh, this gets into a good question, I'm glad you kind of steered the conversation toward that. So let me look at what some of the critics are saying about the whole surveying process as it relates to JD Power. And one of the main concerns from critics is that when we get into the technology aspect of it with the navigation systems and all the other electronic features, is there a difference between those vehicles who may have some of these applications in it and others that may not, when we look at maybe the millennials and then we look at the baby boomers, where the millennials are used to technology, baby boomers, they're still trying to acclimate to this new technology? Would that kind of steer, or would that kind of cause issues with the surveying process itself based upon age differences? So let's say, for instance,
Interestingly enough, there's always been a bias, an age bias, regardless of of what you use from, if you're including technology or not in the study, and because we've looked at it over many years, and even before all the technology was available, there was still an age bias where younger buyers do tend to report and be more critical and report more problems than older buyers. And maybe they don't hear as well. We don't know.
Interesting. I didn't say that. Now, Renee, you said that.
A phenomenon really over time. But now, as you say, add in now the technology, which is very critical. In fact, what we found this year when we looked at why do people avoid certain models is that many more people today, regardless of age, will avoid a model if they feel it lacks the latest technology. That was one of the highest movers in the industry as being an avoidance factor for consumers. So technology is not going away. In fact, the importance of technology and how consumers are relating to it is getting more and more. It's becoming more and more a factor as the phone and your smartphone becomes more integrated with your life and your lifestyle, and the expectations that your car or truck perform and have those same features and functions and capability is really becoming more and more the norm. So measuring that and continuing to measuring that is extremely critical for industries, and there's so much interest in the industry as we move towards, you get towards like an autonomous vehicle. And so you have to start measuring the technologies that will help you get there. And certainly the voice recognition, can it even just connect to my phone? How does it help me navigate? How does it get me where I need to go? And then getting into the more advanced features, like can it help me avoid an accident? Can it help me avoid changing my lanes when I don't intend to? And then, basically what I call the building blocks to autonomous. As we gain more technology and consumers need to gain more confidence with that, really starting to measure that is very important. And that's what we do not only in our initial quality and now our long-term studies, but we also have some specific studies around technologies. The Tech Choice is one that we have where we look at trends for the next. What would you like to see in the next 5 years in your next vehicle, and what do you prefer? How do you prefer to be alerted? So all those types of questions are really critical moving forward, because manufacturers and suppliers are designing today for the products that our consumers will be using in the next 5 years.
Okay, so as we're moving forward to that, let's also look at let's make a quick turn toward dependability study, which is 3 years after consumers actually purchase their vehicles, and you measure it.
Yep.
So we're looking at if I'm in the market for a pre-owned vehicle, because let's look at not everybody's buying new, and there's that millionaire next door philosophy. So the 2015 quality study, which is based upon vehicles that were purchased 3 years ago, we're looking at the top three brands for 2015 were Lexus, Buick, and Toyota. And so I know that if I go out and buy one of those brands, then I'm more than likely to get a vehicle that's going to be reliable, that's going to last for an extended period of time, have probably fewer squeaks, fewer rattles, easier to use the infotainment systems, things of the powertrain, the power windows, things of that sort is going to last longer. So consumers also have access to that. If I want to look at a vehicle, Renee, based upon an individual model, and I want to kind of do what I call a deep dive. So if I want to go, look at maybe a Toyota Camry or a Nissan Altima, which are kind of the top two vehicles within the African American segment, whereas when we're looking at trucks, the Ford F-150, the Chevrolet Silverado, and also the Dodge Ram, those are the top tier vehicles as far as with the mainstream segment. If I want to go and look for a Nissan Altima for 2012 or 2011 or 2010 to see how it ranked for the qualities for long-term quality, how would I go about doing that, and where could I find this information?
Absolutely. Yeah, again, you can go to our website at jdpower.com, and there is a way to just select your model, just as you indicated. You could select the 2012 model year Toyota Camry, and then basically see how it performed in its segment. Typically, when we do comparisons, we look at just cars within that particular segment. We feel that's the fairest comparison. And basically looking at, so how did it perform in various categories? So from an engine transmission standpoint, how did it perform relative to the other vehicles it competes against? How did it perform in audio, entertainment, communication, and nav? It's kind of a long title, but basically your infotainment area. How did it perform in heaters and HVAC, heaters and AC? So basically all the various categories, you can take a look and see, okay, so what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses of that vehicle, as well as some of the other statistics around the vehicle, the average price, and some of the other statistics around it. But yeah, it's a very good indicator for both in initial quality and how does it do in reliability, durability over time. How did that vehicle perform?
Okay, so here's what I can leave with our listeners is two things. Is that when you're ready to purchase either a new or pre-owned vehicle, I'd recommend consumers go to jdpower.com to utilize that as a resource. Also, kind of piggyback with Consumer Reports and use those kind of hand in hand to make a wise car decision. And one other thing I add to that also is that you can utilize this report to determine if you're going to buy an extended service contract or not. As you're going through the report and you notice that a particular vehicle may have problems with the engine or transmission or could be prone to it, then to get a service contract to cover those things for a period of time. So that's what would be my recommendation as it relates to this. Okay, well, Renee, thank you very much again. And again, tell us where we could find out more about the automotive survey process. Give us your website again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's jdpower.com.
Okay, jdpower.com. And also, listeners, you'll also be able to access the vehicle dependability report, which is for 3 years or more. Also, the initial quality study, which is the first 90 days of ownership. You'll also be able to access that from my website, jeffcars.com. Renee, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being our first guest. And again, thanks for helping to steer us in the right direction as we're going out making our car buying decisions today.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Jeff.
Take care. Have a good day.
Hey, you too.
Okay, bye-bye.